So welcome to our viewers, to our, I'll repeat this, our April 7th, Diane Booker wants me to do this, April 7th, 2020, Board of Selectmen meeting, which we're doing virtually. First, I wish to thank all of our town departments for helping during this crisis, especially our first responders and our fire department. And thanks to all of our citizens for observing the social distancing instructions that the governor's announced. This is very important. We, the Board of Selectmen, will meet every week to discuss the most current guidelines of what actions we need to consider taking. I have some notes here. Next week, in the future. Next week, we expect to meet with our counterparts in Hamilton to discuss virtually through Zoom the potential dates for our town meetings and the elections, as well as the staffing for our jointly funded departments. We will also discuss what communications we received from our Hamilton Wenham School District leadership as to their plans for the continuation of the school year and their cost reduction efforts. Since they represent more than 50% of our town budget, we're anxious to hear from them, which to date we have not. Lastly, we do not know when we can schedule our town elections and an annual town meeting, absent instructions from the state. For tonight, we will reluctantly pass over the previously scheduled presentation of Great Blue research on our town survey. This presentation will take considerable time, as it should, and it's well worth reviewing when our current crisis is over. I reviewed it a couple of days ago, and I was very, very impressed, and that I can't wait to have it, but this will probably take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, so that we had this on the agenda first, but the crisis really takes precedence over the survey. But it was well worth doing the survey, I thought. So let's go to the first agenda item, and the next agenda item, which is what? Let's see. Anthony, what's the next agenda item?
It's update from the public health nurse, Mary
Oh, good.
Thing, and Dr.
Please.
Singh is on as well.
Please, proceed.
Well, good evening, Selectmen and residents of the town of Wenham. Thank you all for your attention to the guidance that's coming from the Board of Health, as well as the state government and the federal government. We are projected to be moving into the surge of the infectious period in this crisis, where we're expecting more and more individuals to become affected by it. So the important message that we want all residents to know is that town officials are here to help you as needed. Your key job, everyone has a role to play right now, and that role is to stay home. You're doing your part by staying home. It might not feel like much, but stay home so that others can fulfill their essential roles. And your essential role is to stay home unless you absolutely need to go out for essentials. That would be food or medication or an urgent medical appointment. Certainly getting outside for some fresh air and exercise is important, but if you're going to do that, please wear a face covering, and please do ensure that you are following social distancing guidelines. Don't be closer than 6 feet to another person who's outside your home. So we're continuing to track what's happening in Wenham. We have had no recent case increase, but again, the concern about that is those numbers are only reflecting those who are able to be tested. So as of this moment in time, we have had 5 people confirmed infected with COVID-19 in the town of Wenham, and all 5 thankfully have recovered.
Oh, that's good news.
Yes. Any question from the selectmen at this point in time?
I don't have any.
I'm all set. This is John.
The one thing I neglected to say is we've put a good amount of work into the town webpage. There's a COVID-19 webpage that's highlighted in the lower right-hand corner of the webpage that you can click on. It's separate from the Board of Health page. It's got wonderful information. It will be updated twice weekly, and I'm very proud. Jackie and Nikki Roebuck have done a beautiful job. It looks fantastic, and it has good current information. So you can get information on our local needs there, as well as the mass.gov website, as well as the CDC. There's the 211 call that you can use, and you're also able to sign up for text messages from the state of Massachusetts.
Mary Beth, this is Catherine. That's really the only comment I wanted to make, and you made it before me, to thank everyone. I've been paying attention to the website, and I think it's great. So thanks to everyone who did that. It also, I think, served the purpose that people were concerned about, in the fact that it's providing information that people want, but in a way that's very much put in context. So people, I think, will continue to know what they need to do, what's the most important thing, and not just focus on numbers or lack thereof, and with the caveat. So kudos to everyone on the content and the design of it. It's easier to navigate and find the information now.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other comments? Yes, no? So let's move on to item number 2B2, extension of our no parking regulations. Anthony, you want to take that?
Sure. Chief Perkins is on the call, and he's going to request some additional parking bans. Chief Perkins?
That particularly over the weekend, the residents of Conrad Circle as well as Pleasant Street reached out to the police department, and were just frustrated where we had already limited parking. People were taking it upon themselves to park just beyond those zones, and in some cases off the side streets off of Topsfield Road. They requested that we ticket the cars, which we, as present, cannot do. It's not a no parking zone. So I guess the request would be to just designate those areas temporarily, no on-street parking. And we won't be out there ticketing residents. It's mostly the fact that people that are coming to use the rail trail or Pleasant Pond, and they're just kind of circumventing the system by going around where we have limited parking and parking in those areas.
So Chief Jack Willen, where are they parking to get to Pleasant Pond? Where are they parking that's a nuisance right now for Pleasant Pond?
Along Lower Pleasant Street.
Lower Pleasant Street, okay. All right. Fellow Selectmen, Catherine, you want to speak first? Do you agree with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I was under the impression that relative to Lower Pleasant Street, that was already there is no on-street parking on Pleasant Street, but if we need signage there so that you can enforce it, absolutely. And we've heard a lot about the rail trail, so yeah, completely supportive of that.
John, do you have any comments? John Clemency?
I only have one, and that is more observation. The driving I do around town and so forth, there's almost no vehicle traffic, and there's a lot of foot traffic. So you have to watch out very carefully for both foot and bicycle traffic, which in Wenham was not very prevalent before.
Okay, I don't have a formal motion in front of me, but I'll just make one up right now. Based on the chief's recommendation, the police chief's recommendation, I move that we adopt the police chief's recommendation for the no parking, addition of no parking signs in areas as he described in our meeting tonight. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Catherine,
Aye.
yes.
John?
John, yes.
Jack Wilhelm, yes. There you go, chief. Go to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, for everything.
Yeah, I did take a circle around. I saw on a rail trail, the police did a good job of, I thought they did a good job of marking off where they can't park, but I did notice a couple of joggers on the rail trail. They must have maybe parked in the areas the chief was talking about or walked down there. But most of all, I think that people are just walking the streets locally as opposed to going to those places. And I think that they did a good job. I saw the sign in the canal. There was a temporary sign put up last Friday and a more permanent sign today. I did notice there was moved to the right to allow the residents of that road. There's only 2 or 3, I think, particularly the person in the gray house on the left, as you managed to get into his driveway, not his driveway. So, but I didn't see any cars attempting to circumvent the sign that said you can't go down there. It's closed. So that's good. Police chief, do you have Tom? Do you have any observations about the compliance around town of the not using the parks, the playgrounds, and everything else? Any of your police officers observe anything positive or negative?
I would say it's mostly positive. Um, Most people are being compliant and cooperative and polite. It's been the exception, not the rule, when we've had to actually speak to people about their compliance. I am a little worried as the warmer weather's coming that that's going to, ramp things up a little, but we'll take it as it comes. We are waiting on a few more prominent, professional-looking signs that we've ordered. They're going to be coming in hopefully tomorrow or the next day. But the DPW has been great. They've really been an asset as far as getting all that equipment out there and closing things down. So big shout out to them.
Excellent. All right. Any other comments by the other two selectmen, John or Catherine?
No,
John, okay.
All set, Jack.
All right. Now we're on to discussion of cost savings initiatives for the remainder of fiscal 2020. So I think that Anthony has circulated a report last week, and he circulated a report. I read it today. He might have published it yesterday, and that it's a fairly comprehensive report. And I applaud lots of people who have put a lot of time into this report by the various departments. I think that some of them have done an outstanding job. I'd like to compliment Kim Butler particularly for a very, very comprehensive report of what she's doing and not doing. And I was very impressed with that. Thank you, Kim, for doing that. And I understand that the majority of her part-time staff has been laid off. Is that correct, Anthony?
I think, I don't know if it's laid off is the right term. I think
Furloughed,
that
but not working, whatever.
they're not working. They're
Yeah,
not
okay.
working.
So I'm going to go through, Catherine and John, do you both have a copy of this report handy?
is this last week's report?
No, this week's report. Dated April today. I think it came out a little late from Anthony. It was dated April 7th, today.
If it's in our packet, I should have it.
Well, I don't know where it is, but I got it.
It was emailed by Nikki this afternoon. If you need it, Catherine, I can email it over to you now.
Is this a report that, yes, I have it. Starts with Assessor's Department?
Yes.
That's right. That's
I
right.
have it.
So I'm going to go through and make some comments, positive and not so positive. So that I think the assessing department was not very positive. It was just, this is what the assessors do all year long. And that, I want to know what they're doing right now, not all year long, what the assessing department, I was on the Board of Assessors for 6 years, chairman for like 3 or 4. So I know what they're doing, but, and most of the people know what they're doing, but what they're doing exactly right now was not very helpful in their report. So you might want to pass that along, Anthony. I did talk to Tom Tanos on Sunday, asking him to review, he's the chairman of the Board of Assessors, asking him to review the workload they have right now and suggest perhaps some reductions. He's not been feeling well lately, and he promised to get back to me tonight, which he hasn't. I understand that, but I'm going to continue to ask him for his recommendations. Right now, I think that they could use some reductions. The fire department.
Jack, excuse me, please. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think you just said that you asked Tom Tanis to make a report to you on reductions that could possibly be made in the assessing office?
The same, no, I want him to make a report, which you have in front of you from the Board of Selectmen. I wanted Tom Tanis's comments from the Board of Assessors to be incorporated in this report we have in front of us right now. I don't have anything from him other than generically from the assessing department.
Okay.
You have the same report. You might not have read it. But
Actually, I certainly have read it. And actually, I think there was more information, which I'm trying to find on the report that was, I think, made last week relative to assessing.
I was unimpressed. So in the fire department, I think that the fire department, I'm told, is very busy, except the one sentence line could be definitely expanded to tell us how much additional stress is on the fire department in terms of picking up people, bringing them to the hospital, so on and so forth. So I would encourage Anthony to encourage Steve Kavanaugh to give us a little more description of what they're doing. I'm gonna go through each one. The finance department, I thought they did a good job discussing what they're doing. The EPW, fine. I think the town clerk did a good job going ongoing specific tasks. I thought she did a good job as well. I didn't know she was in there yesterday as well. The council on aging, I think that I'm not sure how valuable that we are in checking calls to the older residents. That might have been okay or desirable in the first week. I'm not sure whether or not that's necessary to continue, and I kind of question that. I'm not going to go into it. The library, I thought she did an outstanding job. She gets an A+ for what she did. I'm very impressed with the details she provided us. And that the only comment I have is the page is not numbered, but it says library payroll report during closure. She said all full-time library staff are currently being paid. How many people are in the full-time? She didn't actually say that, but everything else in the report was outstanding, I thought. Again, she did the best job of anybody responding. I don't know. Do you have any comments on that, John and Catherine?
I'll wait till you finish.
All right.
No, keep going, Jack. That's fine.
Keep going. All right.
Yeah. By the way, let me just take a step back. I spoke with the chairman of the Board of Selectmen for Rowley, town of Rowley,
Yep.
and he receives daily a report from the ambulance service that they perform within the town of Rowley, and he gets that report on a daily basis. I thought that might be of help in order to better evaluate what kind of a call provision that we're making.
Well, our fire department, the first responders, obviously, thankfully, according to Chief Kavanaugh, anecdotally, that some of his call firefighters were laid off. So there's 4 people responding to calls right now than heretofore we've had in the past. So I guess that's good news. But I would be interested, and so would other people in town, I think, to hear what is the incidence of increased calls, if any, and that what types of calls are we getting, how many people are being transported, for example, to Beverly Hospital with COVID, whatever, for medical reasons, whatever other calls he's getting. So that would be helpful to understand.
Yeah, that's the point I was trying to bring to you, to the board, is that this is what I found from another municipality, which is somewhat similar to our town. The chief probably could use that.
So this is Catherine. I have interest in that information only to the extent that it would inform us in any action that we want to take. So certainly, I personally am not interested in daily numbers, but if we had an update from the chief, at these meetings on, what his increase or decrease or in calls would be, that might be valuable over time. It's a little hard to go week by week, but I think it's a data point that might be useful over time.
Yeah, maybe weekly as opposed to daily.
Yeah, I'm not interested in daily either. I'm just interested in, are more people, is the stress on the fire department increased as a result of this COVID-19 thing in terms of the activity level they have, going out to people's houses and transporting people to Beverly Hospital? Is it up? Is it about the same? Is it lower? Just as a point of reference. That's all I'm interested in. Okay, that was the report that Anthony provided us, which I just went over. So let's see. So I think that people, our townsfolk, the few I've talked to, and maybe Catherine and John have talked to others, are really interested in us conserving, reducing expenses during this period of time prior to now to June 30th. I don't know whether it's May 4th or whenever Governor Baker's going to release us from this quarantine, I'll call it. And that I'm a little worried, and a little more than a little worried, that May 1st is coming. That's the date that residents are required to send in their tax payments for the previous quarter. And we kind of run a tight ship for cash. And that if there's a substantial number, and I'm talking about substantial, meaning 10% and even 15% are going to be substantially delayed in setting their payment, I believe that we could have a cash problem. I've talked to Anthony about this, and he's the finance department is preparing, whether they file it or not is another story, which would require the Board of Selectmen approval, revenue anticipation notes that we could borrow money if we need to. But I think that two things can happen. One, they should continue preparing that paperwork, which Anthony tells me today and yesterday they're doing. But also, I think that since the majority of the services in town, not the fire, not the police, not the highway department, but other areas are not that are shut down and people can't come in to transact business or ask questions. I think that it's behooving us to basically look at critically where we can save money for the town that we don't have to spend. That because basically the world is shut down, and so is the town, and so is the state. So I'm looking for ideas and comments on what is the appetite here for basically asking departments to consider reducing their personnel staff because of the reduced workload that they're experiencing. And that I think that, anyway, I'll stop, and I have another suggestion in a minute, but I want to stop on that one and ask for comments. And I'm trying to go back and forth between John and Catherine. This time I'll ask John for his comments on what I just said.
All right. Thank you, Jack. I support your beliefs in looking at possible reductions, but more importantly, or equally as important, is the logging in. You read a report from Anthony from each one of the department heads, and tracking what each person is doing is not in an attempt to eliminate somebody, but it's more an attempt to figure out where the workload is. As I mentioned with the ambulance service, well, if the chairman of the Board of Selectmen gets a report daily or weekly or however it might come, then you have some idea of what your ambulance call is. And thus, in our situation, what's the demand on our personnel with our ambulance service? But that goes for Mary Beth or Jackie or anybody else, finance department. Where is the workload, and how can we better adjust other personnel to be supportive of that workload that may be not going noticed? Because a lot of times I've always found that somebody who does a good job knows how to get it done, and then just takes on more and more without saying anything.
Anything else, John?
And that's it.
Catherine?
So I agree with John when he says that we need data in order to evaluate, the situation. I do want to circle back. I think relative to a couple of points that you made, Jack, if we think about assessing, I found the report that was done in the last packet, which is actually on page 38 of the last packet, did a better, well, a good job, no, page 39, did a pretty good job of talking about what they are actually doing in assessing today. That, is partly what they normally do, which means that there's work to do, and partly some additional work. So I guess I don't share the issue of assessing. I do think we do need to continue to monitor, and a way of, I'm not sure counting hours is the way to do that. When I think of I think we have to think about the fact that this is a government entity and therefore an essential required, kind of service. So it's much harder to have those discussions and make those decisions when, we've been told these are essential services. I do also agree with John that if there are places where even on given days or weeks, people are not as busy as they used to be, perhaps there's another place in town that they can be, their workload can be adjusted. From everything I get the fact that we think that money might be a problem, and we've come up with a plan A, but Jack, I guess you're suggesting a plan B. I don't disagree with that. I just don't think we have enough information to be rational about it, to actually make those kinds of decisions. And the other thing I keep thinking about with staffing in general in town hall, and also in the departments that are under the auspice of town hall, is that we have a longer term strategic responsibility. When I think of the folks that are in those seats now, and we all know there are not very many of them, there certainly aren't excess folks. If we were to make changes in some of those departments, we could essentially be in a situation that when sooner hopefully than later, we're up and running, we have some critical shortages that then are, as we know by having posted some of these positions, really, really hard to fill or fill with the people that are quality. So I think that there are a lot of factors to consider in this particular situation. And it starts with data, and I'm not. I think these reports were good, and if I read them, it sounds to me as if everyone is doing something, and sometimes it's actually mandated. Like I believe I read that on the Concom, they haven't been given any relief from a lot of the work that they have to do. So obviously Concom has to continue to work. Building is still happening, and the planning people are still active because they have some projects that are ongoing. The finance, well, I don't think we need to talk about finance. I don't think we have any excess capacity there. I kudos to all of them for even getting it done. DPW, again, police, fire, those are the most essential of essential relative to being first responders in one way or another. So absent more information or an event that signals to us that we have a problem, I think we just continue to monitor this. And to your point, Jack, in any way that you feel would be the most effective, or the information that would be most useful to us, great. But I think we're in a monitoring and keeping track phase, in my opinion. That's all.
Well, I don't want to project that we're going to run short of cash on May 1st, and 10 or 50% of the people are going to do it, but I'd like to prepare for that eventuality. And Anthony is doing by this revenue anticipation notes ramp up if we need to do it. And so we can't be based on May 10th, on a meeting of May 10th of Board of Selectmen. Guess what? We can't pay our bills. And Anthony has already warned us several times during the past several months. There's several times during the course of the year he's had to withhold payments, particularly, he's had to withhold payments because he didn't have the money. So we don't have a lot of excess cash here to do it. And so if all of a sudden people are stretched, laid off, and they want to delay paying their real estate taxes, we're in trouble. And so I'm trying to at least come up with a contingency plan for that. Secondly, I think at the annual town meeting coming up, whenever we have that, we'll talk about that in a few minutes during my lifetime, I hope, that I think people are going to say, what did you, the Board of Selectmen, do during this shutdown when we closed town hall and many of the businesses cannot do business because they're not allowed to do business because not essential services? What reductions in expenses did we make? So I think that the Board of Selectmen has a responsibility to at least evaluate where can we make temporary, emphasize the word temporary, expense reductions commensurate with the reduction in town services. That's what I'm trying to get at. And now it might be imprecise and difficult to do. Some of these departments obviously are exempt. You just mentioned the top three. I did too. The police, fire, and presumably the highway department has stuff to do all year long, whether it's snowing or not snowing. But the other departments I've been on the Board of Assessors for 6 years, chairman for 3, so I know exactly what they do. So I don't need to read a report last week or what they're doing. I know what the schedule is of what they're doing, and that I'm basically thinking that in my discussion with the chairman of the Board of Assessors was a good discussion, and he thought that perhaps they could do something, but he hadn't get back to me by this evening, so if I can relate that. So that I think that we have an obligation here to see what we can do before we get into fiscal 2021 to reduce expenses commensurate with the reduction of services or the reduction of workload on the various towns, other than the departments I just mentioned. And I'll add the finance department as well in there, because they have a lot of work to do. See what they described to me today. And I'm sure there are other departments as well, but we didn't get to the like joint rec. That's under the auspices of the town of Hamilton, but not much going on in recreation these days. And so I'll be interested in what the town of Hamilton is thinking about reductions there. I don't know if there's a lot of personnel, but still, I think that we're obligated to look where we can to reduce expenses and save the taxpayers in the town of Wenham, who are our bosses, I think, money.
So Jack, Catherine, again, I must tell you that we disagree on one point. I understand conceptually what you're trying to say, and we should be proactive, but I think that a municipality is not a business. Both of us have worked in the private sector, and we understand if you're not making widgets, then you shouldn't pay the people who are making the widgets, and you can just say no. But we have a strategic problem in town hall or in town, as well as a potential financial one, in that I'm looking a little longer term. So I'm completely in agreement with gathering data, although it sounds, Jack, like you're already asking people to gather data without a deliberation of this board, asking them to gather data to tell us what they can cut. So I have a little problem with that, but I'm going to get over it. But yeah, we should continue gathering data, but I am not particularly motivated by a question that someone would ask me at town meeting, should we be there, whenever, that says, well, what did you do to cut services and cut costs in this difficult time when there are, when there are service reductions? I think if someone asked me that question, my answer would probably be to defend the fact that there have not really been much in the way of service reductions in the town of Wenham, and that we have a strategic and long-term goal. And at the moment, who knows how that will change. For this year, I'm only talking about this year, we don't have a financial problem. So I understand the look forward and I understand the analysis, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, because we are talking about people here. And I haven't really seen evidence that there's anyone, many people, I can't say anyone, that are not, whose services, who are not using their time that they're being paid for in a way that's benefiting the town. So again, I get back to, let's agree that we all want to gather data and then gather it, and then we can look at it. But, I think about what not only do we need to be ready for a possible event that there's a reduction in revenue because people aren't paying their taxes, we also need to be ready for the more optimistic point when someone says, okay, it's time, in 2 weeks we're going to be up and running again, and we have perhaps reduced our staff and cannot do that. So it's a little more complicated than just looking at, well, I don't think the service is actually happening, so why do we have those people?
Catherine, can I let me step in, because I think I've got
John,
something.
it's your turn. John, it's your turn.
All right, let me tie the two of you together. First of all, the data gathering is brand new.
Figuratively speaking, of course.
What's that?
Figuratively speaking. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's new to us. We haven't been doing it in the past, so we're asking something that we haven't done previously. So there's a learning curve going on here. I think the data gathering is critical and essential, and I fully agree with you, Jack, that we need to be proactive as opposed to reactive. To Catherine's point, I think the reason why you're viewing our personnel and our responsibilities as a municipality a little bit differently is because the town of Wenham, in 40 some years I've been here, has never been fat. We don't fatten our budgets. There's not excess personnel. There's not excess equipment. We run a very lean and mean operation. And when you have a lean and mean operation, when it comes time to looking for reductions and cuts, it's going to be very, very hard or very painful to do it all. So I think the data gathering that's why I said earlier in the conversation, the data gathering is for us to better help the department heads see in themselves where the workload is. And so if Jackie's buried in permitting issues to respond to, and somebody else is a little bit less in demand because their work is less, maybe whatever, it doesn't matter who, then you shift the responsibilities. It's a little bit harder to find somebody to run a backhoe if they're coming out of town hall, but that's up to the different departments. But if they're encouraged to look at where the workloads are, then maybe they can be a better department head manager and then advise us as a board where they need help and where they don't need help. Now, the other part of this is at our last meeting, there are some places to save. And I'm going to repeat what I said at the last meeting when the board was presented with a renewal of our insurance program to the tune of $150,000. I think I heard that we had not farmed it out to anybody else, and we're going to give it to Maya. That is absolutely wrong. That is terribly wrong, irresponsible. $150,000 is a lot of money, and I have two vendors. I will have them both. I will have letters of proposal to the chairman and to the town administrator tomorrow morning from both of these vendors. They're very responsible people. I've worked with one of them myself, and the other one sought me out because they knew I was looking for somebody. So there are ways and places to save some money, and we need to just be creative and figure out where those are. I think this may be one of those.
Okay, is that it, John? I'm going to go on to the
Yes.
next subject. So
Thank
that this is an in-between subject. Anthony advised me today that I asked him to check with the town manager in the town of Hamilton and what they're doing. We have two joint programs. The library is under our auspices, the joint records under their auspices. Obviously, both of us are recipients of the school bill. It's over 50%. I think it's 54% of our budget right now. And it's a considerable portion. It may not be over 50% of town of Hamilton, but I'm sure it's the biggest expense. Anyway, so that I wanted to know several things. One, what are they doing? And that two, we'll morph into this in a second, that when we eventually get around to coming up with what is the desirable dates for our next town elections and town meeting, we need to coordinate that with the town of Hamilton. And everyone knows that. They should know that anyway. So that I don't know where they're coming from on that. Do they have any potential dates? And so that their town manager or suggested to Anthony or vice versa, or both of them together, that we should have a joint meeting next week. So I asked for the agenda, which is, fiscal 2020 expense reductions, fiscal 2021, setting up dates for what I just said a minute ago, which is the town meetings and that town elections. And so that initially there was a cast of about 22 people. I suggested it just be the selectmen because that's enough. They have 5, we have 3, the 2 town administrators, town managers. That's big enough. And so where we're going to have it, I'm not sure, but I thought it was worth comparing notes as well as discussing, do they have any strong opinions about what dates they were looking for or not once Governor Baker says ollie in free, and we can now basically after Zoom May 4th, but could be longer. He might extend this till June 4th or July 4th or something else like that. And then as Diane Boko pointed out to me, that we're in a little bit of trouble if we don't pass a town meeting ballot and votes by June 30th, which is the current law. But if we basically get into mid-June, I can't believe that Governor Baker wouldn't come up, the legislature wouldn't come up with some modifications to that for this year. In any event, they're proposing that, and I thought it was a reasonable idea, and that I told Anthony, yes, subject to them coming up with a reasonable agenda, which they did, which is what I just kind of went over. So that's the proposal for sometime next week. The date is uncertain, the time is uncertain, and maybe the week after, but nevertheless, the next week is what they suggested, and that's what I'm responding to right now. Any comments? Catherine, back to you this time.
I think that meeting with Hamilton is an important thing. And I hope to have more information. I think I saw that town council was on this call, but I think we need to have some more information about what options we have legally for town meeting and town budgets and elections. But relative to the other joint services, certainly we need to be talking to our cohort. So I'm more than happy to have that meeting. Again, I have to say, and there maybe I'm a bleeding heart, but I think everybody's watching every word. So if we can state an agenda item that says the same thing and allows people to know what we're doing, but doesn't say review where we're going to cut personnel. It might be just a thought might be given to a review of,
Catherine, I have the exact language. If you want me to say it, I paraphrased it. Here is exactly what he's proposing. Quote, discussion of joint programs, close quote. Discussion of fiscal 2000 budget, close quote. Discussion of fiscal 2020 budget impacts from the COVID-19 response and what it means to our operations now, close quote.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you. I didn't have the benefit of having that, Jack, so I only could hear the comments. So that's great.
I was paraphrasing, but
I know, but sometimes that is not as the same as actually reading it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's generic. I mean, fine. And so that, I hope they actually wanted their FinCom to do it, but that would mean we have 5. I think they have 5. That would mean a cast of characters of 21 in a virtual meeting. I think that's unwieldy. And I think that I understand that Alex Began is going to be convening, our FinCom basically to not so much, he doesn't have anything to do with fiscal 2020, I don't think. But we'll get to fiscal 2021 budget in a second. But okay, do they have any second thoughts on that? And by the way, as a reminder to the Board of Selectmen, we have yet to vote on, because I went back and forth with Diane Bucco today on the override questions. There's 5 of them. We have yet to vote, and either is the Finance Committee voted on our overrides for the fiscal 2021 budget. And that's becoming problematic. So I think we need to, at our next meeting, if it's virtual, or the meeting after that, but sooner rather than later, we need to vote on the town operating override, the school override, and there's another school override, which we never got to because it was in the warrant book, totaling $958,000 for sundry amounts of items, 5 or 6 or 7. They call it the capital plan. And there's also the fire truck, and I think I might be missing one. But anyway, we need to vote on that, and so does the FinCom, in order to move forward. And that,
Mr. Chairman, we do have a member of the public who's raising their hand, just so you know.
well, I'm sorry, this is, we're not entertaining questions from public right now. We have to get through this agenda. And so that although it's open to the public, this is not a public forum where people can talk. So I thank you for letting me know. So anyway, I think that we need to encourage Anthony to either our next meeting virtually or the meeting after that to do that, because Diane Bogo, and I'll get to that in a few minutes, I think, wants to send out the ballots sooner rather than later for people for absentee ballots. And I think that absent comments or a vote by our board and the FinCom on where we stand on these override issues is going to be confusing to those recipients of these absentee ballots. And so I think there's the time is pressure is on us to do so. And so that, anyhow, just say we haven't done it, we need to do it. And so that we'll be scheduling this either the next meeting or the meeting after that. And that I'm losing track here. So anyway, we're going to meet with Hamilton next week or the week after, and Anthony will be raising it. I don't know where it's going to be, in Hamilton or Wenham. We'll see. I'm amenable to either town.
Jack, regarding that, would that meeting be in addition to or in place of the regular Board of Selectmen meeting for Wenham?
I don't know, John. You know, I think that I'd like to tack it on to an existing meeting next week or the week after, but I don't think we should wait more than 2 weeks to have the meeting, and that I don't know what's going to happen next week for this COVID-19. That it's hard to predict, and that
Well, fully agreed, and there must be a very good and constructive agenda. You're absolutely right about that. We're not here to lollygag around or just socialize about stuff.
Yeah, I would encourage both you and Catherine to, and myself as well, to go back and look at those override issues, and so that you familiarize yourself if you've forgotten the size of the amount of money, and that the only thing we voted on was basically separate the school override and the town override into 2 separate overrides. But so I don't think we ever got around to discussing or reviewing what I call the $958,000. They call it the capital override, because it was in the override. It was in the warrant. We never got around to that. So I think you need to familiarize yourself with that, and we all need to take an opinion on that and express that. I think the voters need to understand where the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom come in that. So that's my comments on that. Any reaction to that?
Just this is Catherine, just a clarification, because I sure as heck can't remember. So are you saying that we have not yet voted what the ballot questions will be?
We haven't voted whether the Board of Selectmen yay or nay in each one.
Oh, so you're talking, so actually, our town clerk doesn't have a problem, because she's got the ballot questions, and she could, if she needed to, print ballots. What you're asking for, just like I think all of the questions in all the articles, are whether or not the Board of Selectmen recommend favorable action on those items. Is that right? Am I understanding you?
Yes, and the FinCom as well, to the extent that there are finance articles.
So I think
Chairman, the FinCom did do all of their votes already. Just as a
really?
I'm sorry. Yes, they did. They had them done to be printed in the warrant. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to clarify that, because they did finalize those.
Well, would you please send an email out to the Board of Selectmen to tell us what they voted, please? Because I have never heard.
Yep, we'll be happy to touch base with Chris and have him do that.
Am I correct that the Board of Selectmen has not voted on that yet, though?
Correct.
Yeah.
Not voted on what actions, right?
On
the recommendations, yeah.
Right.
And I actually think we discussed that and said that, not necessarily relative to the overrides, but that we would be voting on those things, and at the very least have that information available for people at town meeting. It was obviously not going to, at the time, not going to ever be in the warrant book, but it doesn't change the importance of us voting on whether or not we recommend favorable action. I agree with you, Jack.
Well, I mean, and Diane Booker is kind of accelerating this. If she wants to send out the absentee ballots, and the ballot itself, I reviewed it, has not only all of those positions that are up for re-election as usual, and that, but there's also the 5 ballot questions. And so if she sends these out, I'm making this up, she's not, but if she sends them out the next 2 or 3 days, I can't imagine that people getting those are going to say, well, wait a minute, what's this all about? And that want to talk to somebody at town hall is the town in favor of this? What is this? So forth. And so I don't know who's going to take that call, but I think we should be on the record as to whether or not we agree or disagree each of the 5. I think the 5th one is the fire truck. Although I was concerned, that there was no dollar amount in there. I'm told that legally we're not supposed to put it in there, but parenthetically somewhere or another, if it's a $50,000 fire truck, that's one thing, but I think it's close to $450,000, and it's a pumper truck, so it's a lot of money. So I don't know how somebody's going to actually vote uninformed about whether they want to do a debt service override for a fire truck. They don't know how much it's going to cost. So somewhere or another, we need to educate the public about why we need a new fire pump truck and that pump truck. saying that right, and what it's going to cost. So apparently, we're not allowed to put it in the actual warrant itself. Anyway, so if I was a Wenhamite not on the Board of Selectmen, the FinCom, what does it cost? You want me to say yes or no on this on an over ballot? What is it? How much? So somehow there's an information gap there that we need to close, in my opinion.
I think that's true. I just was confused because when you said that Diane, our town clerk, has an issue with it, that made me feel like it was a legal issue of,
No, she doesn't
to
have
print the ballot, but she's just voicing what I think all of us are thinking. How in the world are we going to communicate whatever it is we're going to communicate to everybody, considering our present situation? And I
Right.
agree, that's definitely an issue.
Yeah, she didn't have an issue. It wasn't in there. I have an issue. It's not in there. That's all.
Yeah, I got it.
And that, okay. So,
Well, without a
Okay.
meeting, it's very hard to communicate to people, the adequate number of people for support or denial.
yeah.
I have
Okay,
some
so,
questions around that, but they'll come later relative to our discussion of dates.
Oh, and then Jack, to your point of the dollar amount, what about if it were to say not to exceed $450,000?
I think there's a legal reason why it was written the way it is written, and I don't think that we have we'd have to get, I don't want it tonight. Thank you, if you're on, there's a legal reason why Jackie Bresney was advised to write it the way she did. And so that I don't think there's a flaw in that. I'm just saying that there's an absence of information for an intelligent voter to say yes or nay, and that without violating whatever the legal rules are for that. I don't know what, so we have to just grapple with an informational gap for that fifth item, which I have it in front of me. It just says a fire truck, including all related incidental costs, whatever that means. So, okay, so now we're into fiscal.
That is rather vague.
Well, I guess it with legal counsel covers everything. Apparently, I don't know, and that I'm not suggesting we can't change anyway. But okay, so that next we have the annual town meeting and town election timeline. So beats me. We can't do anything until Charlie Baker says all y'all in free, and that right now we can't have a meeting till May 4th. There's two choices we can make here, which we'll be discussing presumably next week with the town of Hamilton selectmen, is that we can guess right now, take a guess and publicize it, and then say, oh, it's subject to Charlie Baker's not extending, I'll make this up, the May 4th state of emergency. I don't think that's a wise thing to do, but we could, along with the town elections and the warrant meeting, I'm sorry, or saying no, until Charlie Baker gives us some guidance that, people are talking about closing down the school systems for the rest of the year. And that this is April 7th, and that doesn't look like tomorrow, the next day, or next week, he'd be saying, okay, looks pretty good. I think that we're not going to extend the May 4th. Doesn't look like that to me, reading the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, or TV, so that I think we should wait a while, and that maybe discuss it again next week or the week after. But I think it's premature to set dates right now, unless the town of Hamilton folks convince us otherwise when we meet with them next week. Open up to comments. Back to you first, John. I'm trying to alternate between you and Catherine. John, you have
yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Jack. The big question mark to me, in my mind, is the school issue. How do you shutter, schools for 2, 3, 4 months and not have to review your budget with the amount of cost elimination, reduction? I would assume they're not paying people for making, cleaning the buildings. You can only clean them so many times and nobody's in there. The food service and so on and so forth. So, has anybody spoken to the school committee and the superintendent to find out, is there going to be a review of their budget and what they're proposing?
I don't know. Anthony, you have any insight on that?
I have spoken to the superintendent. I think it was on the school committee meeting, school committee's agenda. I think I saw Michelle Bailey here. If you want to allow, maybe she has an update, but in speaking to the superintendent about this week ago, I think one of the concerns that was being addressed is with the unknown of whether or not schools will be back in session this year, not continuing to pay such items as cafeteria workers or transportation and several of the other expenses that in the event that they had to get back to school, would those services be available to the students? So I think that that was the discussion that the school committee was having.
And what was the outcome, Anthony?
I don't have it, but Michelle Bailey, I think is on here. Maybe she can give an update if you want to allow her to.
Yeah,
She would do
please.
that.
Michelle, would you give us an update?
Sure. So we have had meetings about other topics, specifically our teachers' contract, and in coming to an agreement on what the working conditions will be. We have talked about those issues, and much like what Anthony said, the the commissioner of the DESE has recommended to all schools for continuity of service that we continue to pay all hourly workers, all teachers, and all contractors. That being said, there is a realization that the bus contract, they're not providing a service, they're not incurring the cost of fuel and maintenance, and the DESE has asked that groups of districts get together to renegotiate cost savings for that part of their contracts. And our assistant superintendent is in the process of doing that with the other districts in our area that work with Salter. We have had a very informative discussion with Brad Hill, and he's very raising the red flags about what state funding will look like for next year, but we have not had a meeting to reevaluate our budget. We would welcome the opportunity to host a roundtable. We would like to invite you, the Board of Selectmen. We have invited the Hamilton Selectmen, who have all indicated their interest in participating in a roundtable, because it's not really just Hamilton and Wenham who are having issues. It's every district, every town, and every city in Massachusetts. And that seems like the place where a lot of the solutions are going to come from is from the State House providing leadership around that. But we have not reevaluated our budget for next year because the costs are still the cost. And this year we're still paying everybody. People are still working. It actually may cost us a little more. It may not. We will have a budget update, not on the 15th, but on the first Wednesday in May, because we feel like by then the state will have had their, they were supposed to have a finance update. The state was supposed to have a finance update today. They had some technical difficulties, so that's going to be next Monday. So we're hoping to get information out of that. But if you guys are interested in having a roundtable with our legislators, we would love to organize it for the last week of April or the first week of May.
Michelle,
Michelle.
I guess I'm confused. How can the schools be closed and the teachers continue to be paid full rate? How are our children being educated?
They're being educated every day, John. There
They
are
are.
online classes happening every day for
Okay.
every class. And they are being provided assignments through, if you're an elementary school student, through an app called Seesaw. If you are in middle school or high school, you're receiving that through Google Classroom. You're turning those in through those applications. The teachers are providing feedback and providing lessons every day.
Okay, this is news to me, so I appreciate learning about it.
Yep, and it's been happening for over maybe even at least 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks.
So K through 12, all the way.
It includes pre-K as well. Yep.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we're down to the bottom of the agenda. Anthony, is there
Excuse
anything?
me, Jack, you didn't let me opine on that. You didn't go get all three of us on the town meeting date question.
Please, I apologize. What do you have to
Thank
say?
you. I don't actually have any comments, but I really want to take advantage. Well, I have questions. I have just questions at this point, and I'd like to take advantage of having Lauren Goldberg. I think, are you there, Lauren? I thought she was. Because she is.
Catherine, she is. She had to step away for a second. She's still on. She just muted herself.
What's
Okay.
what's your
So-
question anyway? What's your question?
The question, so I believe that, and this is one of the things I need to get confirmation on, I believe that the legislature has actually passed and has been signed by Governor Baker, both legislation, all legislation to help municipalities in this difficult time, but legislation having to do with elections and legislation having to do with town meeting, setting elect dates and town meetings, and also budgeting and, spending past June 30th. So my two questions for her will be, can she please explain the highlights of those two things? And they really just need the highlights. And in my mind, in reading them, there's some there's some contradictions in them, which could have a big effect on us. So I just wanted to specifically ask about the contradictions in the two laws. We haven't heard from the governor about when he's going to lift this state of emergency, and anybody can guess that. But I believe we have heard from the legislature through signed legislation about some increased flexibility that the towns have been given. I just don't completely understand it all. And truthfully, before we meet and try to throw out a date or decide a date with the town of Hamilton, I would like to understand the parameters of how we can make the decision. So
Can I add to that before Lauren gets here, and then she can expand on what I'm saying? So my understanding of the legislation that was passed relative to the elections is that, yes, they said you have to have your local elections done by June 30th. That needed to get done pretty quickly because some municipalities had elections coming up as late as in March and early April, which we were one of them. So when the legislature first did that, they put a June 30th deadline. Now, they realized that we don't know if we're going to be ready by June 30th. And they recognize that as well. And in speaking to Lauren, I would expect that they do a second round at the elections, and that would probably happen the first. They think they realize they have to do it the first, the second, the very latest the second week, although that's pushing it, in order to make sure that we fully comply with mailing out the ballots and all that stuff. So if now, as far as our town meeting, yes, they passed that legislation, which allows us to go into the next fiscal year and do a 1/12 budget. And I know Lauren's back, so she'll add on to this. So we can do that, but normally Hamilton, Wenham have a town meeting on a Saturday and election on a Thursday. So if we were looking at June right now, that's the 21st and 21st, and then the elections on the 25th. We don't know if that's going to be a reality, and I've expressed this in the numerous meetings that I'm on, and Lauren's well aware of it as well. Lauren, we're talking about the local election.
she's muted.
Here she is.
Hi, Lauren, it's Catherine.
I think I'm not muted now.
You're
Okay.
on.
So so we can just get it from the source. Thank you, Anthony. Just can you clarify one thing? Anthony just commented. So I was partly initially talking about the legislation that was, an emergency legislation that was passed on the 23rd. That basically the part that I was interested in anyway said that municipalities have the power, town select boards have the ability to postpone elections. But they have to be held on a date certain on or before June 30th. Anthony seems to think, or not seems to think, that sounds like he doesn't know. Anthony believes that you think that legislation might change. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Do you have
well, I
any
think
more
Anthony and I have both heard, I think, the same thing from the state level, which is that At this point, the goal was to get that elections legislation passed right away and to give relief to those communities that had an election occurring right away. I think even when that action was taken, it wasn't 100% clear how serious the COVID-19 virus is going to play out in terms of its effect on day-to-day operations. As a result, I anticipate that there will be things that need to get addressed before the year end, and that dates of elections might be one of those things. There also could be additional municipal finance issues. Right now, we just saw what happened in Wisconsin yesterday with the governor issuing an executive order to stop elections and the court saying you're going to go forward, et cetera. So I know that no one here wants to see that happen. And so there will be attention paid to this before the expiration of the end of the year.
So the current, thank you for that. The current legislation relative to elections opines, I think, that towns need to make this decision to postpone the election before the actual election would have happened to a date certain. So we haven't done that. We've said we're going to postpone it to a date to be determined based on the information that we have.
Catherine, can I interrupt you just for 1
Please.
second? Okay, thank you. Yeah, the date certain information is, you have to read that act in its entirety to kind of understand what the intention is there. The intention is that there isn't a requirement that the board make a decision today about what date an election might be safe to hold, but instead that the board will have the time to analyze the situation, decide whether it's safe to hold the election, and then decide and post notice no later than 20 days prior to the date of the postponed election. So essentially, if the board wanted to, it could wait till the first week in June to decide what date it would be safe to have an election on, and then have the election no earlier than 20 days after its vote. So in theory, it could wait all the way up until, let's say, June 10th before it made a decision.
That's what the current legislation that you think actually might change again, based on the ever-evolving information.
Yes. Right now, the last day the board can make a decision is June 10th, but it may well change over time.
And okay, so the other legislation that I've been trying to keep up with, but it's sort of impossible for the layperson, at least for me, is the legislation that also addresses challenges faced by municipality and speaks to town meeting delays.
Yes.
Allows town meetings to, I think that localities to change or delay town meetings beyond June 30th, and then of course go into that, request.
Yep.
So I guess I just want to establish that in our case, since we have, as Jack talked about earlier, we have on our election, on our ballot, people, which we always have, and 5 financial questions, overrides. So we will not have budgets completed to complete budget approval until after both, in whatever order, the town meeting and the election.
Yep.
So that's where I get concerned about the timing of being sure.
Yep. So the legislature is also thinking about situations like that as well. And so what they've said is that towns that do not have an approved budget by June 30th can go to a so-called 1/12 budget, which is something that's been allowed in cities for years. I don't know why it wasn't allowed in towns, but the legislation that was just passed made it clear that cities and towns can go to a 1/12 budget if they haven't approved the budget by the end of the fiscal year.
Which I guess that's what I'm saying. So we technically, if today, we could hold a town meeting after June 30th, but we have to have the election before June 30th. I'm just talking about today, right?
Right.
And so that represents, it's going to lead me to my final question, which I promise is coming up, which leads me to a kind of a dilemma, because our budget is addressed in both of those, and we need the results of both of those in order to have a budget. And they're somewhat problematic I think, for us to have the elections before, not for people, but for money, before the town meeting. So
Well,
they don't agree, I guess, the timings.
yeah. I mean, it may surprise you to know that you can do Proposition 2.5 ballot questions either before or after the related town meeting vote. And so in some communities, in fact, they'll do one before, they'll have the town meeting, and then they'll do one after as well, depending on what happens at town meeting. So, I think I've been saying a lot that we unfortunately have to be much more flexible right now than we might otherwise want to be. And it may be that if we get to the beginning of June and we don't have, or even the middle of May, and we don't feel comfortable about holding the election, that the town could ask its state representative and state senator to file special legislation on its behalf, allowing it to hold the election afterward, or some other kind of solution that you guys would feel comfortable with. I don't think there's one right way to do things right now. And I think part of the problem, especially for those of us who are planners, is that, kind of that gray area is a little bit tough to sit in for the time being. But we are in a bit of a gray area. And so, if the town decides to have the election before town meeting, I think one of the things that you guys can think about is doing a Zoom call or like a public information session about what those overrides are and why they're like that, and what they're proposing and what each one is about, and that might give people additional information at least about what they're voting on.
Lauren, this is John Clemenzi. What would be the problem if you split the ballot question, the money questions off of the voting ballot and just had your elections themselves on a ballot and have your elections, and then the money issues can come at some point after town meeting occurs?
So the board postponed the election. And so the election is what the election is. So if the board had voted to put questions on and the board postponed the election, it was after the 35th day before the election, then the warrant stays how it is. It didn't press restart on an election. It just pressed pause on the election that you were already having.
Oh, so it freezes it as it is.
It's basically like we just paused it and now we'll just wait to restart it. Now, with that being said, special legislation can do anything. And, I think the governor has been receiving a lot of requests for special legislation. I think this is one of those things where the governor would be more than likely to just kind of wait to see what happens over the next month or so. If we get to the end of this quarantine period, the non-essential business period, and it's very clear that the numbers haven't been improving, I anticipate that we'll see further action by the legislature. So that's only to say, I don't know that making a final plan, I don't know that you're able to make a final plan right now. You're kind of in a wait and see period.
But what we've done so far is, okay, we've covered what we need to, and we've stayed within the whatever gray area with what so far.
That's right.
So I just have one final question, and I'm sorry I've been bottling these up waiting to talk to you. And this is something we talked about a long time ago and may or may not, you explained it to me and I've now forgotten it, may or may not impact us. But I remember you talking about the fact that, so there was an appropriation, I think you'd call it, at a town meeting, and then an approval of, say, an override at an election.
Mm-hmm.
If one of those is yes, and one of those is no, does it require a town meeting to finalize a budget and reconcile those two? An additional town meeting?
So I was just waiting till I could say this. Once every meeting is required, it depends.
Thanks,
It
Lauren.
depends because the appropriation exists in and of itself. So if you have an appropriation for, let's say, a town let's say you have an appropriation for a truck, right? That's outside of the annual town meeting, the annual operating budget. So normally that appropriation would stand on its own. Either we buy a truck or we don't buy a truck. So if we don't get our override, then that appropriation fails and we have bought no trucks. It's different when it's an operational
Yes,
override,
that's
because
my
for an
question.
operational override, and this is, I think, what we discussed, and this is confusing for even municipal, junkies like me. If you, let's say, do an override for the school and you approve the override at the election, what the what the DOR looks at is the first dollar spent for that purpose. So let's say we go to the election, we approve the override, we go to town meeting, and we don't approve the additional whatever the dollar amount is. The override is still going to exist because you've already spent that amount, those first dollars, on the purpose of the override. So if it was schools, for example, we go to town meeting, we vote no on an override, but we spend however much it is. Someone tell me, like a couple million dollars.
Well, it's like $700,000 in
Say we
addition
spend
to their
700.
operating budget that's in.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if the
Right.
override was for $700,000 and the override fails at town meeting but passes at the election, you look at that, or DOR looks at it and they say, how much money did we spend on schools? And if we spent more than the $750,000, they say the override money was spent. So it's complicated. I think the implications are that town meeting is the one that gets to decide how to spend the cash. They decide whether to spend the money. And so even if an override is approved, if town meeting doesn't appropriate the additional money, they can't spend, the town government can't spend it. So as the
Also, the
legislative
town
authority,
meeting is the boss, not the
town
election.
meeting is the boss about who gets to spend what.
Okay.
So I'm still confused. So this is a town operating. I'm pretty familiar with the school override situation, how that works, but a town operating override. So we go to town meeting and the town approves the regular under levy limit budget. And let's just say a town meeting approves the override amount, that article. And then we call it an election, but that's where the ballot question is.
Mhm.
And at that ballot, whether it's before or after, I guess, it fails.
Mhm.
So you're saying that, and it's a $300,000 override. Even if in the case where it passes a town meeting and fails at the ballot, since we've already spent $300,000, it's automatically passed
No,
and we don't have to do anything more?
it's the other way. So if you have a $200,000 override for the general operating budget,
Mhm.
and that fails at town meeting,
Yeah.
okay, then you just appropriate up to whatever the levy limit was. You don't
Yep.
appropriate the additional amount. You go to the election, it's approved. The override is approved. So then the DOR says, what are the first dollars spent? Those first dollars spent on that purpose are the override dollars. So let's go back and let's do the other thing. Let's say it passes at town meeting, the override passes, but it fails at the election, then the override is gone. No override, because you need both parts to allow for the override. You need to spend the money on the purpose for which you intended, and you need to have the people at the ballot say yes.
So any change, okay.
But either way, and I'm sorry, Catherine, either way, the important thing to remember is town meeting decides who spent or how to spend that money. So let's just say the override fails at town meeting, but and for general operating budget, but it passes at the election. Well, town meeting has not appropriated a single dollar more. So there won't be any more money spent.
Right. I understand that. I guess I just believe that there had to be there had to be agreement, but I see that there doesn't have to be, so that's fine. And the only reason I asked that is because if we had to, if we did indeed have to have another town meeting, then that impacts some of our, later planning on dates. That's really the basis for that question.
And that's a really good, it's a really good point. I think, the question of if you go to town meeting and the appropriation passes at town meeting, an override for general operating or an override for schools, and the question fails, there's no override, there's no additional money being spent. Okay, so that's the regular way we understand things, and that is correct. All right. Same thing if you have a special purpose override. So if you do an override to, hire 5 more people in the fire department, then if the override passes, great. You've approved it at both town meeting and at the polls, then that's an override for that purpose, and the money can be spent for that purpose. If it's a general override, they're looking to see, did you spend the
Okay,
initial dollars that you said you were
okay.
going to on that
Okay,
purpose?
I understand. So I'm going to shut up about this really soon. So if we had chosen to write our override article saying it's $300,000 and then itemized what that $300,000 was to be used for, X on the fire department, X for this, X for that, then that would be a special purpose one and would require it to be, it would be treated differently.
Catherine, that is almost 100% right.
I'll never get it 100%,
is,
Lauren. It's okay.
If you, it's that it looks to the purpose for which it's to be spent. So let's say we said X for the fire department, but if we spent X dollars in the fire department, then DOR would look at the first dollar spent and say, okay, you have an override, but we wouldn't have spent any more money in that case.
Okay.
I think it's very complicated because it's just municipal finance, and like not all of that makes sense. I think the important thing to remember is, in order to actually raise and spend the additional money for an override or a debt exclusion, you need approval at both town meeting and at the polls. Okay, to raise on the tax rate and spend that additional money, you need both to agree. You can get an override, meaning the levy limit could be lifted, but you might not spend the additional money. Because if town meeting says no, then the answer is no, you don't have the additional money to spend.
Okay. So it really
Okay.
doesn't impact our planning. And it sounds like my takeaway from this is we need to move ahead, and when it happens, we'll decide what we need to do.
Yeah, I think this is, it's hard to plan for this kind of thing. And again, it's kind of a gray area because either the voters at town meeting could say no, or the voters at the election could say no. You need to kind of see how it plays out.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry to take so much time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm done. And my recommendation would be that we not have too much of a discussion. This is to Jack's point now that I've heard that too much. It seems like it might be a little premature to have a discussion with Hamilton about when we want to change, or actually setting town meeting or election dates, because we may want to wait and hear what happens in the next weeks.
If I could just add one more thing, Mr. Chairman.
God. Really?
I just wanted to say a lot of communities have been discussing possible dates, and even though they're not voting on an actual date, they are saying we're aiming for whatever the dates might be. So I think it's certainly appropriate to have a conversation about it. Whether to make the decision right now or not is another question.
We have to, that's why we're meeting this week with the town of Hamilton, or the following. Mm-hmm. So we have to be in concert with them. So I have 2 last items. One of them.
Thank you, Lauren.
Mr. Chairman, you do have a hand raised in the audience by the town clerk. I just want to let you know.
Not just yet. When I go through the next 2 items, that'll be okay.
I just want to let you know.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, for fiscal 2021 budget, the override. We've been talking a lot about overrides, legal issues on that. There is a possibility that it won't pass either at the town meeting or at the ballot question. Even if it passes both, there's somebody, I'm sure, the town meeting is going to raise their hand and say, excuse me, what would happen if either this town meeting or the ballot fails at the ballot? What reductions is the town of Wenham prepared to take in order to basically reduce its budget by the requested override, which is $361,640. So I think we reminded Anthony of that several weeks ago. I reminded him of that this morning or yesterday. And so I think the Board of Selectmen needs to hear from Anthony not next week or not the following week, but certainly before the warrant hearing, what expense reductions he's prepared to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that we entail if that doesn't pass, or indeed just to answer the question. So that's going to be on the agenda coming up, not necessarily next week, but we can't be blindsided by that, and we have to have an answer to that, as difficult as that may be. That's part one. I mean, I reminded Anthony that today he'd have to come up with that to propose to us, the Board of Selectmen, this is what his recommendation would be, and we'd have to listen to that and either approve it or not, so that we're all on the same page when we go to town meeting. Lauren Goldberg is still wants to say something. Hold it. I'm going to my next one. So next. I don't what that's not a legal question, so I don't know why she's on. But anyway, so that the next one is that Catherine and I disagreed. I think I'm pretty sure we disagreed on trying to examine expense reductions for fiscal 2020, our current fiscal year, and that I think it was pretty obvious that we disagreed. I thought we should be looking for expense reductions now, both in anticipation we might have a problem with receipts coming in from the taxes or not, and that I was for it and Catherine was against it. I'm going to make a motion. I'd like some clarity of this. John has not weighed in, but I'm going to make a motion. I think I know what Gary's going to. So my motion is going to be, if it's not exactly correct, somebody can correct me. I move that the Board of Selectmen charge our town administrator, Anthony Ansaldi, with coming up with evaluating proposed expense reductions for departments in the town that are not essential, and we can talk about what's essential later on, for the Board of Selectmen to approve or disapprove at subsequent meetings, and that's my motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, now we can have a conversation. John, I know where Catherine stands, but I'll get back to Catherine in a second. Do you agree with that, John? Obviously, you second it.
Yeah, I believe we need to be prepared for the unexpected. I mean, Lauren spent a lot of time talking to us about gray area. Well, we're dealing with a lot of gray area here. We don't know what our receipts are going to be. We don't know how many people in the town have lost jobs and may not be able to pay their tax bills right away. So if we don't have a plan A and a plan B, we're only being caught short.
Kathy, I know where you stand. So I'm going to call for a vote.
No, wait, you don't, excuse me, Jack. You don't really know where I stand. I think I would amend that. I would ask for an amendment to that motion. I understand what you want. And I also understand what John said earlier. And I think that the only thing that I would be comfortable with at this point is some combination of that. I am completely in favor of a motion to ask Anthony to gather data around not only where we could potentially reduce costs, but also redeploy resources. That's what John was talking all about, with the intention of reacting to the situations as it arises. I'm not in favor of just asking for going around and asking and determining where we can cut. So I would just word that motion a little bit differently to include the fact that it may be it's an analysis, and it may be cuts or it may be reallocations, and we don't know that.
What do you mean by reallocation?
Well, I think, John, am I right?
I did speak to it. You hit it right, Catherine. For example, Mary Beth. Now she's getting a supplemental addition of 5 people. That's an enormous amount of growth within a small town budget. Now, I guess that money's coming out of the state or federal or somewhere, but either way, that's what I was referring to is, what if the town clerk is buried in, I don't know, wedding applications, and it's going to spend too many hours on that. I'm just picking things out of the air, but then somebody in finance doesn't have quite as much work going on. So this is why it's important to have the data of what are people doing on a daily basis. Are they really performing their job, or do they have time that they can help out a department that has way too much going on?
I don't think I
So-
want to amend I'm sorry, I don't want to amend my motion. I'm going to repeat it. And
Okay.
that basically we're tasking the Board of Selectmen, if it passes, tasking Anthony and Sal to do an analysis of where we're spending money in our current fiscal 2020 budget on non-essential services where we can consider a reduction in expenses, subject to the specific proposals by Anthony being approved by the Board of Selectmen.
And I'll still second that.
What is determined non-essential services considering that? the
That's why
governor's
you're the
declared-
town administrator. You can tell us what's essential and what isn't. Basically,
Well,
the
I'm
fire
talking-
department.
I'm saying all, can I just finish my thought? All of our services are considered essential services right
Well,
now.
I
So
disagree
that's-
with that, Anthony. I totally disagree, okay?
Okay,
You know what, and if you need help in defining that, I think the state has already defined that. I think fire department, police department are certainly essential, and you go down the list from there. So, I mean, that obviously all of them they're all important. Otherwise, we wouldn't be paying the people to do the job. I got it. So that, you know, and I know you're reluctant to do that. I can sense it. But you know what? I want, with the taxpayers are our bosses. So I moved and seconded, and that I'm going to call Catherine. You can also wade in right now.
No, I think I'm just going to make one comment. And you know how I'm going to vote on the motion as you stated it. But I don't think we have really heard from, you just said that we have, you know, we've been hearing from the taxpayers. I don't think that we've had a rash of people who have contacted us to say, you need to do this and you need to do this now. So let's be clear that you think this is the responsible thing to do as selectmen. But
Yes.
please don't put that on the town or townspeople have been asking us to do this, because I don't believe that they have. And I think some of them may be surprised to hear that we are. And I guess the only other thing is we have to, that analysis, I think has to be specific enough to include union and non-union people and those effects. So
Yeah. There's
As
rules for
worded-
union. There's rules for union people. We can't make any reduction in union people without bargaining. I understand that. So, but by the way, I don't know how many Wemmenites are tuning into this broadcast now, but it'll be interesting to find out whether it's Facebook or somebody else, how many people agree or disagree with that. So that we'll be finding out in the next 2 or 3 days, if not tomorrow morning. But I want to task Anthony with doing that. And by the way, anything he comes up with is subject to the Board of Selectmen agreeing with. So there's a check and balance there. But absent proposals, anyway, I've said what I said a few minutes ago. All in favor?
you need a roll
Aye.
call vote.
Pardon me?
Catherine Harrison, no.
John?
Aye, yes.
Jack Wilhelm, yes. It passes 2-1. Let's see. Items we haven't talked about that we should have talked about. I don't know. Anthony, was there anything we should have done tonight that we just didn't discuss that you would wish we had discussed?
No, we are looking at, was hoping next week that for FY21, we are looking at the expenses for FY21 and finding ways to reduce expenses. And one thing that, as you're aware, we reported that our health insurance premiums increased by 14.9%, going on the private sector using a company called NFP. This private company went out and bid our health insurance our health insurance plan, and Harvard was the selected recipient. I went to Meyer and able to work with them and bring that 14.9% increase down to a 7% increase. So I've met with the Public Employees Committee, which includes the union representatives as well as the retirees and well as the non-union people, non-union employees. And we went over the specifics of the plan. And it went over, it was taken favorably by the Public Employee Committee. So that in itself is 60% of $60,000, approximately $50 to $60,000 of reduction going to Maya for our health insurance. So that's something that I'm hoping that we can bring to the board for your approval next week is the goal. So therefore, we can do open enrollment.
Well, you essentially, Anthony, what you're saying is you support Jack's proposal. We're looking
Jack's-
for ways to reduce the cost of operation.
Well, Jack's
However it
proposal was
counts.
for FY20. I'm talking, this is for an FY21. But yes,
you're
I
talking,
do.
You're talking
I've
about the
talked-
following year?
Yeah, the following year. But I do, Jack and I have talked about it. I definitely think that we have to be prepared to make the cuts for FY20. I'm just waiting to see state aid, if something changes there, see how our local receipts are. It's just data that I don't have available. But certainly as that comes closer and that comes in, then we have to determine that. So it's not that I do agree.
Yeah.
I just, right now, it's a little bit premature until we
Okay.
get more information.
I mean, we have a lot of good and valuable personnel that do a great job. So it's not a matter of somebody that, just wasting time for us. Quite the opposite.
Well, based on Anthony waving his hand, looks like there's flies in the administrator's office.
There was a fly.
I thought you said there was no flies on you, Anthony. But
That's
guess
right.
it's not.
Apparently I'm wrong.
Yeah. So Anthony,
Yeah.
you're going to have to, when you get back to the town of Hamilton, you just suggested we vote next week on something. If we have a joint meeting, it's going to be hard to vote. Take specific Wenham issues up in the joint meeting, either in Hamilton or Wenham, so that if we can wait 2 weeks, maybe our meeting with Hamilton can't take place next week. Maybe we'll have to do the following week. So just make sure you just juggle back and forth. Assuming that we meet with Hamilton next week, I don't think we can come up with anything Wenham specific on that agenda.
They did ask for Monday night, Jack. If you wanted, we could actually have a Zoom meeting, because if this was one item that we were going to discuss, the health insurance, we could do our separate Zoom meeting, say at 6, take that vote, then jump on their meeting, say at 6:30.
That sounds good.
Okay, because they want to, is Monday okay? Because they said Monday, Tuesday,
Any
Monday's
day,
their normal.
any day but Sunday is good.
John, Catherine,
That's
you
a
good with
song, by the
Monday?
way.
Yes.
Monday, John?
Yes.
Catherine?
Yeah, Monday's fine. A question about the insurance. You said something about, so this is a cost reduction for FY21. Thank you for looking at that. You said that we would have to hold some kind of open enrollment, though, before FY21 starts.
Oh, yeah, we'd be doing open enrollment really soon after all the approvals and I sign off on it. Yeah.
And can
So,
you do that with your current finance staff?
well,
Those are the people
we
that
can
take care of it.
actually. When we hired our assistant treasurer, Janet from Topsfield, that was her forte, was benefits and payroll. So Janet happened to be very familiar with Meyer and Blue Cross Blue Shield. So that's a big bonus for us to get this done. The challenge is, Jack, you squirting water on me to cool me down? The challenge is to do.
I don't have any water in front of me. Who are you talking about?
No, I thought you had a spray bottle.
I have my glasses in front of me. That's it.
So
I wouldn't do that, Anthony.
The challenge is obviously to do open enrollment when people want to normally sit across from you on the desk and go over this. But, we've had success using Zoom and other types of communication that we feel that we'll be able to do it. And, actually, it not only it saves the employees, the town money, but it saves the employees money. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think that with our staff of Sherry and Janet, I think that we can get this done. It's going to be a tremendous challenge for them and very daunting task under these conditions, but I feel I have all the confidence in the world in them.
So I guess I was asking that because I was wondering if that was an opportunity for deploying some resources that you have in the building that have the ability to help you with that, but are not the normal people that are from other. There may be people from other departments.
Right, it is. We have to have a game plan. So once we get everybody's approval, then we're going to figure out what's the best way to go at this and who can we ask maybe to borrow some folks to help get the message out there.
Okay, thanks.
So
You're welcome.
I was tardy and not, I promised Diane Booker, we went back and forth today with several emails and yesterday as well about her desire to send out the ballots earlier rather than later. And I suggested to her that I try to weave it in tonight. I understand from somebody that she wants to get on, so that, are you still there, Diane? Diane Bucco?
1 second. She may just have to be.
She is, I don't believe she's still on. At least she's not on the participant list right now.
Well,
I'm
let me,
just sending her a quick text to see if she's having technical issues.
well, let me describe what her desire is. And if I'm not doing it correctly, she can correct me later on. Diane is concerned that she wants to send out the ballot questions, which will also include obviously the elections sooner rather than later. She believes that, sending the mails out, by the way, she's already received 54 requests. And so that she wants to send them out using her word, as soon as possible, next week, the week after, whatever, well in advance of us coming up with a definitive date for a town meeting and town elections. And I had some concerns about that, and I expressed them to her. They go along the following lines, in that I don't have any concerns about the election part of it. The nominees are there. They've submitted their letters of 21 people signing it. They haven't withdrawn, and no new people can sign up for any of these elected positions, so that's all done. Whether we have the election, we have the election. It's the ballot questions. So my concern is that neither the board nor the FinCom have voted on the ballot questions. And I would like to have us vote on the ballot. I'm talking about my questions now, on the overrides specifically. Those are there's 5 ballot questions. All 5 of them involve money, although the fire truck doesn't have money associated with it on the ballot box, apparently, the advice of legal counsel. So Diane heard my concerns and my reservations, but she still persisted in saying she thought that it was from her chief election officer's point of view, the sooner we get them out, the better, so they can, whatever. So I wanted her to describe why she felt it was very important to do so, but that's, anyway. And so,
Can we get counsel to weigh in on that, Jack?
well, I just, I think it's, Diane's iPhone. I see that Diane's iPhone. So I like Diane.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Did you see what I just said?
Yes, I did. I've been listening. So
Okay,
yes, I do have a concern about the ballots. From what I'm told, the election does need to be held or is supposed to be held before June 30th. For that reason, as the election official, I need to make sure everybody has the opportunity to vote. To do that, I need to try to encourage more voting by mail, absentee voting, early voting, whatever you want to call it. So with that said, with the delays in the mail, with the concerns people have about the virus, I feel the need that we need to mail out the ballots, because I think more requests will be coming in as well for more ballots, and to give people the opportunity to vote. So that was what Jack and I had been discussing. I had brought it up to the other selectmen and Anthony a week or so ago as well to think about. So Lauren I'd like to, maybe she could weigh in. I believe I still need to plan as if we're going forward with an election. And then if it gets postponed further at another time.
Yeah, before we get legal advice, this is not a question of legal. I mean, you can do it or not do it, but I'm interested in Catherine's and John's opinion on the pros and cons of doing it. When you say earlier, you mean like tomorrow, the next day? And if you say later, when would be the last date, Diane, that you think, or you would be comfortable? That's not a good word.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I think in the best of circumstances, in a regular election with no virus or anything going on, the state normally has us send out ballots no later than 3 weeks prior to an election.
Okay. So I like John and Catherine to comment.
I have a thought on that. I agree with you, Jack, that relative to not only have we not opined on whether or not we agree with the overrides, we've had no real town communication to the towns. So I agree that it's, especially in this very gray area that we're in, and it's a legal question as well. I agree that it's premature to even to send ballots out without at least having an opportunity. It's like sending someone a blank piece of paper that they don't even understand the questions. So I see your point, and I think it's a communication issue of what their people would actually be voting for, not the people, but the money. So if we can legally wait, I would agree with that.
John? Thank you, Catherine. John?
If I understood Catherine right, I agree with what she's saying. It's the confusion in the money part. It cannot be determined. It may change dramatically if the schools come back to us with a different budget line item. There's a whole host of potential issues that could come up on the money part. The people who are running for offices, that I think is very, very important to get taken care of, because they made a commitment to fill a position, and it's only fair that they get that position, or others who are stepping away and being filled by somebody else. So that's the part I'm very concerned about. I think the money aspect will be determined by the town meeting.
Okay, Diane, you're on.
I'm on.
Yeah, your turn.
Good for you.
Turn. I told you I would try to get my Board of Selectmen colleagues' opinion, and you've just heard it.
Did we want to hear from council?
I
Diane,
want to hear
did
from
you?
Diane. I want to hear Diane Buellko's reaction first, then we can go to
Oh,
legal.
okay. Okay, so you want her reaction? I thought you wanted her
Well, I
to
don't know.
repeat the
She
question.
might say, thank you very much, Selectman. I don't care. I want to send them out tomorrow. I don't know what she's going to say, so I'm waiting for her to say.
I'm thinking so hard to think of something very clever. I think the election is going to have to happen at some point, and the election ballot is set. I understand that the residents might not know how you feel or what the whole ballot question situation is about, but they do need to get the ballots, and I need to prepare for an election, for a highly voted by mail election in this situation. And it will also bring awareness to the ballot questions once people start getting them, and then questions might be raised. It might work in your favor in getting people to be more aware, but I don't know. So I don't know. I understand your concern, but I also know we need to keep moving forward. And with that, though, I would like to see if Lauren has any ideas.
One more question before we get to Lauren. When will you want to send them out? Wait a minute. I want to hear. Let's say, when would you want to send them out other than tomorrow?
I'm flexible on that. I
No,
just think
I'm looking for you. Is it 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now? Let's say that we don't.
Before that, within a week.
Even though we may not have a town election or town meeting until mid-June?
Even if we have it June 30th, yes.
Won't people forget the question and the answers by then if you send it out in 2 weeks from now? That's 2 months ahead of time. People will lose. Won't they just forget what the hell would they just send in?
I don't know.
Maybe
Mr.
the
Chairman?
seniors. Yeah.
If
right.
I may.
Who's this?
This is Lauren.
Okay.
Thanks. So one of the purposes of Chapter 45 of the Acts of 2020 is to encourage absentee and early voting. Certainly, I agree and understand the sentiment of the board members that it is early if the election is going to be in late June to have those sent out. But I do think that the intent is to ensure that as many people can vote by absentee or by early ballot as possible. I think the question of exactly when to send them is not answered by the law, and it's not answered definitively one way or another. No matter what, 28 days prior to the date of the election, typically the clerk would send notice to anyone who's on the disabled voters list that absentee ballot applications were available. In this case, that notice could be sent anyway if people wanted to send that out to say that absentee ballots and early voting applications would be available. That could be a first step, Diane, towards moving towards sending the ballots out. You could wait a little while to send them out. But at some point, because the ballot is set, it does seem to me that they would go out. I should also point out that if, let's just say today you voted an absentee ballot, and then 3 weeks from now you change your mind, you can write to the clerk and ask for a new absentee ballot, and that can replace the one that you've already returned. So at least there's some recourse for a person who changes their mind over the term. Also, a person who's voted by absentee ballot can vote in person on election day if they choose.
Okay, there you go. There you have it. If there are no other issues anybody wants to bring up, I'm going to move that we adjourn. It's now 8:23 for Catherine Tinsley's records.
I'll second your motion.
All in favor?
Catherine,
Aye.
yes.
Aye, aye. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with us. That was almost a 2-hour meeting. Sorry it was so long. Kind of important, though.
That's
Stay
right.
safe. Stay safe, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Let's see.